On the eve of her wedding, she uncovered a devastating truth. Her fiancé, Mark, was entangled in a corporate fraud that shattered everything she believed about love and loyalty. Instead of walking down the aisle, she walked away, exposing the scandal and setting off on a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and justice. Years later, she has rebuilt her life on a foundation of truth and purpose, finding love in John, a fellow professor who shares her unwavering commitment to integrity. As she prepares for a wedding far different from the one she once envisioned, she reflects on the choices that led her here. She realizes that the best revenge isn't in destroying the past, it's in building something better. But when Mark resurfaces, seeking redemption, she faces one final test. Can she close the chapter without reopening old wounds? In the end, she discovers that true victory lies not in vengeance, but in transformation, proving that the most powerful endings are the ones that lead to new beginnings. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Make sure to like, comment, and share with others who love powerful stories of resilience, redemption, and transformation. Your support helps us bring more inspiring content your way. Now, let's get into it. The night before my wedding, I overheard my fiancé laughing with his friends. "She's just a temporary choice until someone better comes along," he said. The next morning, as he stood at the altar, I walked in, not to marry him, but to deliver a surprise that would bring him to his knees. I never intended to be the bride who shattered her fiancé, not with love, but with devastation. Yet, life has a way of rewriting our stories when we least expect it. The night before my wedding, fate handed me a truth I never asked for. And today, I would return the favor. Mark Lehrer and I had been together for 3 years. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and from a well-respected family. His mother, Zenit, had become like my own, filling the void left by my parents' passing. His sister, Natyr, was the best friend I never had. Everything seemed perfect, or so I believed. The bachelor party was at the Grand Hotel, just down the street from our penthouse. I hadn't planned on going there that night, but I had forgotten to give Mark his grandfather's cufflinks, a special request from Zenit for the ceremony. The hotel staff knew me well. Mark and I had hosted numerous charity events there, so they directed me to the private lounge without question. That's when I heard it. Mark's distinctive laugh was followed by words that shattered my world. "Come on, man. You can't be serious about settling down with Jennifer," his best friend, Bala, scoffed. "Why not? She's perfect on paper," Mark replied, his words slightly slurred. "Her trust fund will help expand Galera Enterprises, and her connections are invaluable. Besides, she's completely devoted to me." Laughter erupted. But it was his next words that turned my blood to ice. "She's just temporary anyway, until someone better comes along. Someone more suitable for the long term." I stood frozen, clutching the velvet box containing the cufflinks. My entire world crumbled. 3 years of memories flashed before my eyes, now tainted with a cruel new perspective. The late-night business calls, the unexpected cancellations, the subtle ways he manipulated my decisions, it all made sense. But I didn't cry. Instead, an eerie calm settled over me. I returned home and opened my laptop. As Mark's business partner, I had access to everything: emails, financial records, client information. For hours later, I had gathered enough evidence to destroy not just his heart, but his entire carefully constructed world. The morning of the wedding arrived with an unsettling serenity. My hands didn't shake as I applied my makeup, a stark contrast to the trembling excitement I had imagined feeling on this day. The evidence I had collected lay hidden in a cream-colored envelope, tucked safely in my wedding suite. Zenit burst into the room, her eyes glistening with motherly pride. "Jennifer, darling, the flowers just arrived, and they're absolutely perfect," she said, holding up my bouquet of white peonies and blush roses, unaware that today they would serve as a weapon rather than a symbol of love. My bridesmaids fluttered around me like elegant butterflies in their champagne-colored dresses. In the mirror's reflection, I caught sight of Natire adjusting my veil with such tenderness that my resolve almost wavered. Almost. I can't believe my brother got so lucky, Hazel whispered, squeezing my shoulders. You're going to take his breath away. If only she knew how right she was. The next hour passed in a blur of hairspray, last-minute lipstick touches, and champagne toasts. I couldn't bring myself to drink. Every ping from my phone made my heart race, not from pre-wedding nerves, but from anticipation. My private investigator had promised final confirmations by noon. At 11:43 a.m., the text arrived, additional evidence secured. The reporter is in position. I excused myself to the bathroom, phone clutched in my trembling hands. The screenshots confirmed everything: Mark's offshore accounts, the diverted company funds, and, most damningly, emails to his mistress discussing their post-honeymoon plans. The same mistress who, ironically, sat on his company's board of directors. A knock at the door startled me. Jennifer, the coordinator, says we have 30 minutes, Hazel called out. Just finishing up, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same person who had spent yesterday morning writing her vows with tears of joy. This woman wore her wedding dress like armor, her red lipstick like war paint. When I emerged, Zenit pulled me aside. I want you to have this, she said, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around my neck. It's been in the Glare family for generations. Mark's grandmother wore it on her wedding day. The pearls felt like ice against my skin. Another family heirloom soon to be collateral damage. Thank you, Zenit, I whispered, hugging her tightly. No matter what happens today, you've been more of a mother to me than I could have ever hoped for. She looked at me quizzically, but before she could respond, the wedding planner appeared, headset in place, clipboard at the ready. Places, everyone. The guests are seated, and the groom is at the altar. My bridesmaids lined up, their excitement palpable. Natire kissed my cheek before taking her place. I waited until they had all left before retrieving the envelope from its hiding place, sliding it into a discreet pocket sewn into my dress. Through the heavy wooden doors, I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon, the same song Mark and I had chosen together on a rainy Sunday months ago. My phone buzzed one final time, reporter and photographer in place. Business partners, all present. Police contact on standby. I deleted the message and tucked the phone away. The wedding coordinator appeared beside me, radiant with professional cheerfulness. Ready, Miss Grant? I thought of the moment I first met Mark at that charity gala. His smile had lit up the room. I thought of our first kiss in the rain, the way he proposed under the stars in Tuscany. All the dreams we had shared. Then I thought of his cruel laughter last night. The years of lies. The deception. The church doors swung open. The wedding march began to play. 200 guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Mark stood tall and handsome in his tuxedo, beaming with pride. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, that smile would shatter, along with his reputation, his business, and his carefully constructed world. I took my first step forward, clutching my bouquet. The weight of the envelope against my thigh reminded me of my purpose. This wasn't a wedding march. It was a countdown to destruction. Yes, I told the coordinator, my voice smooth as silk. I'm ready. Each step down the aisle brought flickers of memories, moments I once treasured, but now recognized as carefully crafted illusions. The whispers of "beautiful bride" from the guests felt like bitter ironies against my skin. Mark's smile widened as I approached, his confidence unwavering, the perfect mask of a man who thought he had everyone fooled. 3 steps from the altar, I caught Bala's eye. His smirk faltered slightly, sensing something amiss in my expression. 1 step away, I could see Zenit dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Natire practically bounced with excitement. The sight of them made my heart clench, knowing they were about to become casualties in Mark's downfall. 1 final step. You look stunning, Mark whispered, reaching for my hand. I took a step back. Just enough. The priest opened his mouth to begin, but I turned to face the audience instead. Before we begin, I thought, let's rewrite the ending. I loved you, silent church, but you only saw me as a stepping stone, a means to an end. Zenit stood up, her face full of confusion and growing horror. Mark, what is she talking about? Mother, I can explain, Mark stammered. Explain the embezzlement? I interrupted. The affair? The planned merger that would have bankrupted dozens of families? Please, Mark, tell everyone exactly who you are. By now, SEC agents were approaching, flanking the altar. Mercy had slipped out through a side door, but another team was waiting outside for her. She wouldn't get far. You've ruined everything. Mark snarled, his charming facade finally cracking. I smiled, reaching up to remove the Glare family pearls.
No, Mark.
You did that all by yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with. The next few moments dissolved into chaos. The agents moved in. Nat sobbed. Zenit stood frozen in disbelief, while the guests either fled or recorded everything on their phones. I maintained my composure, watching as Mark's perfect world crumbled around him. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned to me one last time. I did love you in my way, he said. Your ways? I replied, stepping closer and keeping my voice low. Your way was never good enough. Consider this, my wedding gift, the truth about the man you really are. I turned and walked back down the aisle alone, my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Zenit's muffled sobs, the clicking of cameras, and the growing buzz of shocked conversations. But ahead of me lay freedom, justice, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes karma needs a little help arriving on time. The spring sunlight hit my face as I pushed open the church doors. A crowd of reporters awaited, a final touch to ensure Mark's downfall would be public and complete. Their questions rained down around me, but I smiled, knowing this wasn't the fairy tale ending I'd once dreamed of. It was something better, it was justice. The following weeks unfolded like scenes from a movie I never imagined starring in. Headlines screamed, Glare heir's empire crumbles, and jilted bride exposes corporate corruption. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from well-wishers and journalists eager to hear more about the bride who took down one of the city's most powerful families. I sat in my new apartment overlooking Central Park, a place I'd chosen specifically because Mark had dismissed it as new money territory. The irony wasn't lost on me. On my laptop, the latest news displayed that Mark and Mercy had been indicted on multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. The evidence I had gathered opened a Pandora's box of corporate misconduct. Nat called daily, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. I could have helped, but we both knew she couldn't have. Her blind spot for her brother had always been her greatest weakness. Zenit's reaction surprised me the most. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, she appeared at my door carrying a familiar velvet box. The pearls, she said, holding them out. They belong to you now. Zenit, I can't. You exposed the truth, she interrupted, her voice firm despite her red-rimmed eyes. That makes you more worthy of these than anyone who's worn them before. We sat on my new sofa, drinking tea from cups I had bought that very morning. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. I failed him, she finally whispered. Somewhere along the way, I must have... No, I said, taking her hand. Mark made his own choices. You gave him everything he needed to be a good man. He chose differently. The investigation into Glare Enterprises revealed corruption deeper than anyone had imagined. Mark's father had laid the groundwork years ago, and Mark had perfected the art of deception. The company's collapse affected hundreds of employees, but I had prepared for that. Anonymous tips helped many transfer their investments weeks before the scandal broke. Bala had tried contacting me once, probably hoping to save himself. His message remained unread in my inbox, alongside Mark's desperate attempts at explanation. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Mercy turned state's evidence, of course. She was always practical. Her testimony ensured that Mark would spend a significant part of his prime years in federal prison, trading bespoke suits for prison garb. The media painted me as a hero, the whistleblower bride who chose justice over love. They didn't understand that it was never a choice. Once I knew Mark's true feelings, the path forward became clear. Love without respect is like a house built on sand. It's bound to collapse. My own company flourished after the scandal. Clients appreciated working with someone who demonstrated unwavering ethical standards. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark's attempt to use me had backfired, launching me into greater success than he'd ever imagined. 1 month after the wedding, I received a letter from Mark's grandmother. Her shaky handwriting filled 3 pages with memories of her own marriage, of watching Mark grow up, and of her gratitude for preventing the family name from becoming synonymous with unchecked corruption. "You did what none of us had the courage to do," she wrote. "You saw the truth and refused to look away." The letter ended with a photograph of Mark's grandfather on his wedding day, young and hopeful, much like the hope I had once seen in Mark's eyes, a hope that had twisted into something darker when no one was watching. I kept the photo, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The charming smile that had once won my heart had hidden a calculated mind, plotting my destruction. Never again would I let someone else's mask become my reality. As summer faded into autumn, I found myself walking through Central Park more often. The changing leaves reminded me that transformation, while painful, is necessary for growth. Each step forward took me further from the woman who had nearly married a lie and closer to someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid of standing alone. Zenit often joined me on these walks. We never spoke of Mark directly, but his absence hung between us like an invisible thread, connecting 2 women who had loved and lost the same man in different ways. "You know," she said during one of our walks, "I always wanted a daughter who would carry on the Glera legacy of strength and integrity. Turns out I got one, just not in the way I expected." I squeezed her hand, understanding the weight of her words. In trying to destroy me, Mark had inadvertently given me something precious, a family bound not by blood or false promises, but by truth and resilience. The media eventually moved on to newer scandals, but the lessons remained. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't saying, "I do," it's having the courage to say, "I won't." 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I found myself standing in front of Glera Enterprises' former headquarters. The building's gleaming facade remained unchanged, but the company's name had been replaced by that of its new owners. Inside, the atmosphere pulsed with transparency and renewed purpose. I had been invited to consult on the company's restructuring, a delicious twist of fate that hadn't escaped my notice. The new management wanted to understand how corruption had gone undetected for so long. Who better to explain than the woman who had uncovered it all? Walking through the familiar corridors, I passed Mark's old office. It had been converted into a communal workspace, its imposing mahogany doors replaced with glass panels. Sunlight streamed in where shadows once lurked, a fitting metaphor for the company's transformation. Nat had taken over a small division of the company, determined to rebuild her family's legacy the right way. We had slowly repaired our friendship, stronger now for having been tested. She had inherited her mother's strength, but was channeling it into creating positive change. The quarterly reports show remarkable recovery, Nat announced during a board meeting. We've retained 80% of our original workforce and implemented all recommended transparency measures. I watched her with pride, remembering the tearful conversation we'd had months ago when she discovered more of Mark's deceptions. Instead of breaking her, each revelation had strengthened her resolve to make things right. The media had dubbed it the Glera Redemption, a story of corporate resurrection led by the women Mark had underestimated. Zenit, too, had become an advocate for corporate accountability, using her social connections to promote ethical business practices. My own consulting firm had expanded rapidly, specializing in corporate fraud prevention. Each client brought new challenges, but none matched the satisfaction of dismantling Mark's carefully constructed house of cards. Mark's trial was set for the spring. His legal team had tried every delay tactic possible, but justice was catching up. I had been called to testify, a prospect that filled me with both dread and anticipation. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received an unexpected call from Mark's grandmother. "I've been going through old family albums," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. There's something you should see. Over dinner at her elegant townhouse, she showed me photographs of Mark as a child, a smiling boy, full of innocence and hope. Mark once had the potential for goodness before ambition and greed twisted his path. I watched him change, his grandmother confided, her fingers tracing the edges of a yellowed photograph. Year by year, success by success, he became someone I didn't recognize. You saw it too, didn't you? Before anyone else did. I nodded, recalling those subtle moments when Mark's mask had slipped, a cruel comment here, a dismissive gesture there, signs I had chosen to ignore until the night before our wedding. The Glare name once meant something, she continued, closing the album. Thanks to you, Natire, and Zenit, it might mean something worthwhile again. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred into streams of gold and silver. I thought about legacy, not just the Glarers but my own. By choosing to expose the truth, I had created a ripple effect of positive change. The wedding dress still hung in my closet, not as a reminder of what I had lost but of what I had gained, strength, integrity, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction but reconstruction, building something better from the ashes of deception. Tomorrow, I would meet with another company seeking guidance on ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark's betrayal had led me to my true calling. In trying to use me as a stepping stone, he had inadvertently helped me find my path. The night before my wedding, I had overheard a truth that shattered my world. Now, 6 months later, I had helped build a new one, stronger, clearer, and far more authentic than the illusion I had almost married into. Justice served. Spring arrived with an unexpected weight. Mark's trial loomed on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the witness stand, my voice unwavering as I recounted every detail. His eyes never left me during my testimony, but they no longer had the power to make my heart race. Instead, I saw him clearly for who he was, a man whose greatest defeat was being exposed for his true nature. The evidence was overwhelming. Each document I had gathered that fateful night became another nail in the coffin of his defense. His lawyers attempted to paint me as a vengeful woman scorned, but the paper trail told a different story, one of calculated fraud spanning years. The most poignant moment came when Zenit testified. She sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her elegant composure intact as she detailed how her own son had manipulated family funds and betrayed generations of trust. The truth, she stated clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, must stand above blood. Mark's face crumpled at her words. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion break through his practiced mask, the realization that he had lost not just his freedom, but his mother's unwavering support. The trial lasted 3 weeks, each day bringing new revelations. Former employees testified about threats and coercion. Business partners revealed how they had been drawn into Mark's web of deceit. Through it all, I sat in the gallery beside Natire, watching the man we had both loved reveal his darkest colors to the world. The verdict came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years with no possibility of early parole. As the judge read the terms, I studied Mark's profile, still handsome, but somehow diminished. The charming smile that had once won over boardrooms, and my heart was nowhere to be seen. Mercy, having pleaded to lesser charges in exchange for her testimony, received 5 years. She avoided my gaze as she was led away, her designer outfit replaced by prison orange. Bala, charged as an accessory, accepted a plea deal that included community service and hefty fines. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Zenit stepped forward, with Natire and me flanking her. The Glarer family, she announced, her voice steady, has always valued integrity above all else. Today's verdict, while painful, upholds that tradition. We thank the jury for their service and justice for prevailing. Drove away, I watched the prison disappear in the side mirror. Mark would serve another 13 years, but I was already free from the weight of what-ifs and might-have-beens, free from the ghost of a love that was more fiction than fact. The sky had cleared, and ahead of us, a rainbow arched across the horizon. nature's reminder that after every storm, there's a chance for something beautiful to emerge. My phone buzzed with a message from NA Tire. The foundation's latest initiative had received full funding. Life had a funny way of working out. I'd lost a fiancé, but gained a family. I'd lost a dream, but found a purpose. The night before my wedding had seemed like an ending, but it had really been a beginning. The start of a journey towards something far more precious than the fairy tale I'd almost settled for. The truth, it turned out, hadn't just set me free. It had set us all free. 1 year after my meeting with Mark, my life had blossomed in ways I never imagined possible. The Ethics Foundation had expanded globally, and our consulting firm had become the gold standard in corporate transparency. But it was a different kind of meeting that would mark this chapter of my story. I was giving a lecture at Columbia Business School when I noticed him in the audience, dark eyes fixed intently on my presentation, asking thoughtful questions about preventive measures against corporate fraud. Professor John Chin, visiting faculty from Stanford, specializing in business ethics and corporate responsibility, he introduced himself after the lecture. Miss Grant, your experience could revolutionize how we teach ethics in business schools. Would you consider collaborating on a comprehensive curriculum? There was something refreshingly genuine about him. No hidden agendas, no carefully crafted persona, just authentic passion for creating positive change. Zenit noticed it first, during a foundation board meeting where John presented his ideas. He looks at you the way one should look at someone they admire, she remarked afterward. Not as a prize to be won, but as an equal to be respected. Our professional collaborations slowly evolved into coffee discussions that stretched into dinner conversations. John never pushed, never rushed. He understood the weight of my past and respected the strength it had given me. NA Tire teased me mercilessly about the way my eyes lit up when discussing our curriculum project. You know, Jennifer, it's okay to be happy again, to trust again. But trust wasn't something I gave easily anymore. One evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village, I told John everything, not just the headline lines he'd read, but the raw truth of loving someone who saw you as nothing more than a means to an end. His response was simple, but profound. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It couldn't have been easy to share. Months passed, and our curriculum project flourished. Business schools across the country began adopting our ethics program. John and I spent countless hours refining case studies, including the Galera scandal, now taught as a landmark example of corporate fraud detection. One rainy evening, as we walked through Central Park after a successful presentation, John stopped under the shelter of a massive oak tree. You know what amazes me about you, Jennifer, he said, raindrops glistening in his hair. Not just your strength in exposing the truth, but your courage to remain open to possibility, even after everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what Zenit had noticed months ago. Here was a man who had built his career on teaching ethics, not because it was profitable, but because he believed in it. Someone who saw my past not as baggage, but as wisdom earned. The truth is, he continued, I've fallen in love with you. Not the headline version of you, but the real you, brilliant, compassionate, and unafraid to stand for what's right. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to show you that love can be honest, straightforward, and true. Standing there in the rain, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Not the naive hope of my younger self, but something stronger, tempered by experience and wisdom. NA Tire and Zenit were ecstatic when I finally admitted I was dating again. Life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need, Zenit said, squeezing my hand. Sometimes it's the courage to expose a lie. Sometimes it's the strength to embrace a truth. The Foundation's annual gala provided a perfect opportunity to make our relationship public. As John and I danced under the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hotel, yes, the same one where I'd overheard Mark's betrayal, I realized how far I'd come. You're thinking about that night, aren't you? John asked softly. Yes, I admitted, but not with regret. That night taught me to trust my instincts, to demand truth and love. It led me here. He smiled, understanding in his eyes. To quote your famous speech, the truth doesn't always give you the ending you wanted, but it always leads you to the one you need. As John and I swayed to the music, I caught Zenith's knowing smile from across the room. She raised her glass in a quiet toast, and I understood her unspoken thought. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in destroying what hurt you, but in building something beautiful from the lessons it taught you. The truth that shattered my world 2 years ago had led me to a love that didn't need to be tested or proven, a love as transparent and steady as the principles we both lived by. 3 years to the day after my almost wedding to Mark, I stood before my full-length mirror, adjusting a different white dress. Simpler, more elegant, it reflected the woman I had become. Zenith fussed with my veil, her eyes glistening with genuine happiness. This time, she whispered, "Everything is exactly as it should be." Hazel burst into the room, champagne in hand. "John's practically floating out there," she said, "and you should see the students who showed up. Half of Columbia's business school came to watch their favorite professors tie the knot." The venue wasn't a grand cathedral like my first planned wedding. Instead, we chose the Botanical Gardens, where John and I had spent countless hours discussing our curriculum between stolen kisses and shared dreams. The guest list was smaller, but every person represented a true connection built on mutual respect and understanding. "Ready?" Zenith asked, holding out a familiar velvet box. The Glarer pearls gleamed in the morning light. Once a symbol of a dynasty built on deception, they now represented something different: the power of transformation, of turning pain into purpose. Actually, I smiled, closing the box gently. "I think these belong to the foundation now. A reminder of where we've been and how far we've come." Zenith's eyes welled with tears as she hugged me. "You truly are the daughter I was meant to have." The ceremony was everything my first one wasn't: authentic, intimate, and filled with genuine joy. John's vows spoke not of ownership or obligation, but of partnership and shared purpose. He mentioned how my story had inspired him long before we met, how my courage had made him a better educator. In my own vows, I acknowledged the journey that had led me here. "Love isn't about perfect moments or grand gestures," I said, looking into his steady gaze. "It's about choosing truth over comfort, growth over complacency, and finding someone who makes those choices with you every day." The reception buzzed with energy as students mingled with business leaders, all united by our shared. Later that evening, we gathered at Zenith's townhouse, not to mourn, but to close a chapter. Hazel brought out a bottle of champagne, the same vintage we had planned to serve at the wedding. "To truth," she toasted, her eyes meeting mine. "And to the sister I almost had, who turned out to be more family than my own brother." Zenith reached for my hand as we sipped our champagne. "You know," she mused, "I've been thinking about what you said that day at the altar, about love and truth. You chose truth over love, but in doing so, you showed the greatest love of all, love for justice, for what's right. A new beginning." As I drove home that night, the city's skyline glittered against the dark sky. The weight I had carried since the night before my wedding finally began to lift. Mark's sentencing wasn't just an ending, it was permission to truly begin again. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo appeared, Mark in his prison uniform, being led to his cell. Below it, a message from a sympathetic guard. "Thought you'd want to see this. Justice served." I deleted it without responding. I didn't need to see Mark brought low. I had already seen him at his highest and found him wanting. My revenge wasn't in his imprisonment, but in the freedom I had found by exposing the truth. The wedding dress that had hung in my closet like a ghost was finally packed away, donated to a charity that helped domestic abuse survivors rebuild their lives. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. What was meant to be a symbol of love and trust would now help other women write their own stories of redemption. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the girl who had once dreamed of becoming Mrs. Glare. She had been naive, perhaps, but her belief in justice had been her saving grace. Mark had seen her trust as weakness, never realizing it would be his undoing. The truth had cost me a wedding, but it had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding the right partner, but about finding the strength to stand alone for what's right. Legacy rewritten. 1 year after Mark's sentencing, I found myself back at the Grand Hotel, not as a bride-to-be, but as the keynote speaker for a corporate ethics conference. The irony of speaking in the same building where I had overheard Mark's true nature wasn't lost on me. The ballroom was packed with executives eager to hear from the woman who had exposed one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. As I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking against the polished wood, I caught my reflection in the glass panels, confident, poised, and completely transformed from the woman I had been a year ago. "Good morning," I began, surveying the crowd. "You're here today because you want to learn how to prevent fraud and corruption in your organizations. But what you really need to learn is how to see the truth hiding behind perfect smiles and designer suits." In the front row, Zenit and Natir sat proudly. Hazel had successfully rebranded the remaining Glera assets into a company focused on sustainable investments. Zenit's foundation had already sponsored ethics programs at 3 major universities. "The greatest threat to corporate integrity," I continued, "isn't always external. Sometimes, it's the charming CEO with a Harvard degree. Sometimes, it's the trusted partner with a flawless track record. And sometimes, it's the person you plan to spend your life with." As the event ended, I glanced at the small velvet box on my desk, the Glera family pearls. No longer a symbol of betrayal, but a reminder that sometimes the most precious inheritance is the courage to stand for what's right. The truth hadn't given me the happy ending I once dreamed of. Instead, it had given me something far more valuable: a purpose, a mission, and a family bound not by blood or marriage, but by an unwavering commitment to integrity. 18 months after I walked away from my wedding, I received an unexpected phone call. Mark wanted to see me. His request came through his prison counselor, a meeting for closure. Natir, Zenit, and Hazel advised against it. Their protectiveness showed in their concerned expressions, but something inside me needed this final conversation, this last piece of the puzzle to complete my healing. The prison visiting room was stark and cold, nothing like the luxurious spaces where we'd once shared our dreams. Mark sat at the metal table, the orange jumpsuit a jarring contrast to the tailored suits he once wore. His features had hardened, the polished charm replaced by a weathered authenticity I'd never seen before. "Jennifer," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him, maintaining a composed exterior while my heart raced with memories. "Why did you want to see me, Mark?" He looked down at his hands, the same ones that had once slipped an engagement ring onto my finger. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, who I was, who I am." 18 months of reflection, I noted. That's quite a change from the man who thought he could charm his way through life. "I deserved everything that happened," he admitted, surprising me with his directness. "The truth is, I never deserved you, not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of lost possibilities. Through the visiting room window, I could see clouds gathering, mirroring the storm of emotions in my chest. "You know what the worst part is?" he continued, looking up to meet my eyes. "I did love you in my twisted, selfish way. I loved you, but I loved power more. Love shouldn't be a game, Mark." "No," he agreed quietly. "It shouldn't." We sat in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the prison creating a somber backdrop to our final conversation. "Mercy's been writing to me," he said suddenly, "asking for forgiveness, as if forgiveness could undo what we did." I studied his face, seeing for the first time the toll of consequences on a man who'd never believed they applied to him. "Are you asking for my forgiveness too?" "No," he shook his head. "I'm asking for you to know that you were right about everything. The woman who walked away from that altar was stronger than the man standing at it ever was." The guard signaled that our time was nearly up. Mark straightened, a shadow of his old composure returning. "I heard about your work," he said. "The Ethics Foundation, the consulting firm you've built. Something meaningful from the ashes of what I destroyed." "We all did," I replied. "Your mother, Natir. We found strength in the truth you tried to bury." As I stood to leave, Mark called out one last time. "The night before the wedding, when you overheard me, was that the first moment you knew?" I turned back, remembering the girl who had stood outside that door, clutching those cufflinks. No, I answered honestly. It was just the first time I admitted what I'd always known. Walking out of the prison, I felt lighter somehow, not because Mark had changed or because his recognition of his faults had given me validation. I felt lighter because I finally understood. My strength hadn't come from exposing his lies or walking away from our wedding. It had come from choosing truth over comfort, justice over love, integrity over illusion. Zenit was waiting in the parking lot, her presence a silent support. "Are you okay?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Yes," I smiled, realizing it was completely true. "I really am." As we do. Commitment to ethical leadership. The Foundation's newest initiative, a scholarship program for whistleblowers seeking to rebuild their careers, had just launched, turning another page in our story of transformation. Anna Tyre clinked her glass for the toast, her smile radiant. "To my sister, not by blood but by choice, who taught us all that the greatest love story isn't about finding the right person, but about becoming the right person. And to John, who proved that true love doesn't ask you to compromise your values, it elevates them." Later, as John and I swayed to our first dance, he whispered, "Do you ever think about how different life would have been if you hadn't overheard Mark that night?" I looked around a room at the family I had found, the purpose I had discovered, and the man who loved me, not despite my past, but because of how it had shaped me. "That night didn't change my destiny," I replied. "It revealed it." News had reached us that Mark was up for parole review, but it felt distant now, like a chapter in someone else's story. His actions had set my transformation in motion, but they no longer defined me. The woman who had walked away from a false dream had found something real, a love built on truth, a purpose born of principle, and a happiness earned through courage. As the evening wound down, Zenit pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, pressing a small package into my hands. Inside was a simple journal, Mark's grandmother's diary from her early days as a Glare. She wrote about choosing truth over convenience, even when it costs you everything, Zenit explained. "You're not just continuing her legacy, you've reinvented it." Looking out at the garden where John chatted with our guests, I felt a profound sense of completion. The revenge I once sought had transformed into something far more powerful: redemption. Not just for me, but for everyone touched by our story. The truth that had once shattered my world had ultimately made it again, piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice. As John caught my eye and smiled that honest, unguarded smile that had first begun to heal my heart, I knew that sometimes the best endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we earn by being brave enough to embrace the truth, no matter where it leads. The night before my first wedding had taught me what love wasn't. Every day since had taught me what it truly is: a choice, a commitment, and above all, an unwavering dedication to truth, both beautiful and brutal. In the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, not just surviving betrayal, but learning to love again, more wisely, more deeply, and more authentically than ever before. 5 years after the fateful night that changed everything, I stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at Stanford Business School. The faces before me represented the next generation of business leaders, eager to learn from what had become known as the Glare case study. John sat in the front row, now the department head of business ethics, beaming with the same pride he had shown on our wedding day. 2 rows behind him sat Zenit and NAT, who never missed these annual lectures. But this year was different. This would be the last time I told this story. "Many of you know the headlines," I began, my voice carrying through the hushed space. "The jilted bride who exposed a corporate scandal, the woman who walked away from a Glare. But today, I want to tell you about something more important than revenge or justice. I want to tell you about transformation." A student raised her hand. "Miss Chin, what made you finally decide to stop giving these lectures?" I smiled, resting my hand instinctively on my slightly rounded belly. Our first child still a secret. Because some stories need to end so new ones can begin. After the lecture, Anna Tyre joined me in my office, perching on the edge of my desk, like she used to do during our consulting days. "Mark's up for parole next month," she said quietly. He asked if we would speak on his behalf. The news didn't shock me like it might have once. Time had a way of softening even the sharpest edges of betrayal. "Will you?" I asked. "I might," she admitted. "He's different now. The letters he writes, they're not from the brother I knew. They're from the brother I wished I'd had." Zenit had visited him regularly over the years, watching her son slowly shed the layers of deception that had defined him. She shared with me his gradual transformation, how he'd started counseling other inmates, helping them understand the ripple effects of white-collar crime on families and communities. The foundation had evolved too. What started as a response to corporate fraud had grown into a global movement for business ethics. The Glarer pearls, now displayed in our headquarters lobby, had become a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the darkest truths could lead to light. John found me later that evening in our home office, surrounded by case studies and student papers. "You're thinking about Mark's parole, aren't you?" I nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I'm thinking about how far we've all come. How that night before my wedding wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning for all of us." The next morning, I made a decision. I wrote a letter to the parole board, not to condemn or support, but to acknowledge change. "The man I was going to marry chose deception over truth," I wrote. "The man you're considering for parole has chosen to face that truth in the end. That's all any of us can do. Choose truth again and again, no matter the cost." The Foundation's annual gala fell on the eve of Mark's parole hearing. As I stood addressing the crowd, I saw faces that told the story of the past 5 years, students who'd become ethical business leaders, whistleblowers who'd found new purpose, families who'd rebuilt from the ashes of corporate fraud. 5 years ago, I thought revenge was about destroying something. I've concluded now that it's about building something better. The greatest revenge isn't in watching someone fall. It's in helping others rise. Later that night, John and I walked through our favorite spot in the Botanical Gardens, the same place where we'd exchanged vows, where we'd first discussed the ethics curriculum, and where we now told our families about the new life growing inside me. "You know what I love most about our story?" John said, his hand entwined with mine. "It's that it was never really about revenge at all. It was about truth finding its way to the surface, like a flower breaking through concrete." I thought about the journey, from the bride who'd overheard a devastating truth to the woman who'd made that truth her strength, from seeking revenge to finding purpose, from a shattered dream to a life more meaningful than I could have imagined. The night before my wedding to Mark had seemed like the end of my story. Instead, it had been the first line of a much better one. A story about choosing truth over comfort, growth over vengeance, and love that didn't need to be proven because it proved itself every day. As John and I walked home under the stars, I touched my belly gently, thinking of the new chapter we were about to begin. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in the ending of one story, but in the beginning of a better one. 6 years after that fateful night at the Grand Hotel, I received an invitation that made my hands tremble. Mark had been released on parole, and Zenit was hosting a small family dinner. The reason for the gathering stopped my heart for a moment. Mark wanted to make amends formally and properly to everyone he had hurt. John squeezed my hand as we pulled up to Zenit's townhouse. Our daughter Grace slept peacefully in her car seat, unaware of the weight this evening carried. At 8 months old, she embodied everything pure and honest that my life had become. N.A. Tyre met us at the door, her eyes showing a mix of anxiety and hope. "He's different," she whispered as she hugged me. "Really different." When Mark entered the room, I barely recognized him. Gone was the arrogance and coldness. In its place was a man who seemed to have shed the armor of deception. He stepped forward, and with a trembling voice, he said, "I've come to apologize to all of you. For every lie, every betrayal, and for the person I became because of my choices. I can't undo the past, but I can learn from it and be the person I should have been. For my family, for you all, for myself." It wasn't about accepting or forgiving, it was about seeing that the man before me had, finally, chosen a different path. I took a deep breath, my hand resting on my daughter's back, and said, "I don't need you to apologize to me. You need to apologize to yourself, And then you need to prove it to the world through your actions. But this is where your story and mine diverge. I've already found peace, and I won't wait for anyone to find it for me anymore. Later that evening, as we shared a quiet moment, John kissed my forehead and whispered, "I can't believe how far we've come. How much we've built." I smiled, the past now only a distant echo. It's not about the distance, it's about the journey. And what we've built will last far longer than any of us ever expected. In the end, it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about realizing that no one could take away the life we'd created, the love we shared, or the truth we'd embraced together.